Have you ever thought about what will happen when you can no longer take care of yourself? Most people assume they'll have two choices: move in with family or go to a nursing home. But what if there was another way? This is the story of Robert, a man in his 70s who believed he had his future all figured out until life threw him a curveball. What happened next changed everything. And by the end of this story, you might see aging in a whole new light. Stay with me, because what Robert discovered might be the key to living your golden years on your own terms. Robert's life before the struggles. Robert had always been an independent man. In his younger years, he worked as a school principal, guiding generations of students while planning for a peaceful retirement. He and his wife, Margaret, had built a life full of love and shared dreams. They had two children, Emily and David, who grew up in the warmth of a home where Sunday dinners were sacred and laughter echoed through the walls. When Robert retired at 65, he envisioned traveling with Margaret, spending time with the grandkids, and enjoying the simple pleasures of life. For a few years, that's exactly what happened. Robert and Margaret took road trips, visited national parks, and spent quiet evenings reminiscing about their youth. Life felt complete. But as time passed, so did their youthful strength. At 72, Margaret's health took a turn for the worse. What started as occasional forgetfulness turned into full-blown dementia. Robert found himself in a new role, her caretaker. The once joyful home turned into a place of silent struggles. The woman who used to cook his favorite meals now needed help remembering how to boil water. Robert did everything he could, preparing meals, helping her bathe, reminding her to take her medication. It was exhausting, but he never complained, because that's what love does. Then one cold evening in December, Margaret passed away in her sleep. Just like that, Robert's world crumbled. The house that once felt warm and full of love became unbearably quiet. The space beside him in bed was empty. The routine that gave him purpose, caring for his wife, was gone. For the first time in his life, Robert felt truly alone. The grief took a toll on Robert's health. He stopped eating properly, barely left the house, and spent most of his days lost in old memories. His once strong body grew weak, and simple tasks, like carrying groceries or climbing stairs, felt like climbing a mountain. His children, Emily and David, lived in different states. They called him regularly, but calls weren't enough. They worried about him living alone, especially after he had a minor fall in the kitchen that left him bruised and shaken. "Dad, you can't live by yourself anymore," Emily said during one of her visits. "Why don't you come stay with me for a while?" Robert hesitated. He loved his daughter, but moving in with her? That felt like giving up his independence. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said, forcing a smile. "I can manage." But deep down, he knew the truth. Managing wasn't the same as living, and that scared him. The dilemma: where does he go from here? The next few months were filled with uncertainty. Robert's body continued to weaken, and simple chores drained him of energy. The loneliness weighed on him. One evening, as he struggled to carry a grocery bag into his house, he realized something heartbreaking. He couldn't do this alone anymore. The reality hit him like a punch to the gut. But what were his options? His son, David, suggested hiring a caregiver, someone who could come in daily to help with chores, cooking, and companionship. It sounded like a good idea until Robert saw the cost. $2,500 a month, he muttered, staring at the numbers on the pamphlet. His pension barely covered his bills. There was no way he could afford that. The other option? A nursing home. The very thought made his stomach turn. Nursing homes had always felt like a last resort, a place where people went when they had no one left to care for them. He wasn't ready for that. Not yet. And so, with no better option, Robert reluctantly agreed to try living with Emily. At first, it seemed like a practical solution, but what started as a hopeful new beginning soon turned into something neither of them expected. When Robert packed his bags and moved into Emily's home, he told himself it was only temporary. Just until I get stronger, he thought. Emily welcomed him with open arms, setting up a cozy room for him at the back of the house. She cooked his meals, reminded him to take his medication, and even insisted he relax while she took care of the household chores. At first, it felt like a relief. No more struggling with groceries. No more eating dinner alone. But as the weeks passed, Robert began to notice things, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. Emily was always busy. Between work, her husband, and her 2 teenage kids, her schedule was packed. She tried her best to include Robert, but he could feel it. The strain, the unspoken pressure of having him there. Dinner conversations often revolved around school projects, work deadlines, and weekend plans he wasn't a part of. He sat quietly at the table, smiling politely, feeling like an outsider in his own daughter's home. And then came the hardest part. One evening, Emily hesitated before speaking. "Dad, I was thinking maybe you could start making your own breakfast? I can set things up so it's easier for you." Robert nodded. "Of course," he said, but deep down it stung. Not because he minded making his own breakfast, but because he knew what this meant. He was becoming a burden. No matter how much Emily loved him, his presence had shifted the balance of her household. And so, little by little, Robert withdrew. He started eating alone in his room, not wanting to interfere with family time. He turned down offers to join them on outings, saying he was too tired. He told himself it was better this way. But in reality, he had never felt more lonely. One night, as Robert lay awake staring at the ceiling, he thought about the old saying, "A parent's home is always a child's home, but a child's home is never truly the parent's home." He understood it now. Emily and her family had their own rhythm, their own way of doing things. No matter how much they tried to make him comfortable, he would always feel like a guest in his daughter's home. One evening, he overheard Emily and her husband talking in hushed voices. "He seems so quiet lately. I don't know if he's happy here." "I know you want to help him, ma'am," her husband sighed, "but this is hard for all of us. The kids feel like they can't be themselves around him. We need to talk about what's next." Robert felt a lump rise in his throat. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was just reality. The truth was, he wasn't happy there, and neither was his family. It was time to find another solution. The next morning, Robert told Emily, "I think I need to try something different." She nodded, relief flickering in her eyes. Together, they looked into home caregivers, someone who could visit daily to help with meals, laundry, and small chores. It seemed like the perfect middle ground. They found a caregiver named Lisa, a kind woman in her 50s, who agreed to come 5 days a week. For the first few weeks, it worked well. Lisa helped Robert regain some of his independence. She cooked simple meals, reminded him to take his medication, and even took short walks with him around the neighborhood. But then reality hit. Money bagged the cost. Robert's pension barely covered his expenses. Adding Lisa's salary on top of that, it was draining his savings faster than he could afford. Hourglass not done the uncertainty. After just 3 weeks, Lisa announced that she had taken a full-time job elsewhere. "I'm really sorry, Mr. Robert," she said kindly, "but this job doesn't pay enough for me to stay." Robert understood, but the disappointment was crushing. His backup plan had failed. What was left? With no other options, Robert reluctantly agreed to visit a nursing home. Emily and David took him on a tour of a facility nearby. The staff was friendly. The rooms were small but comfortable. Meals were provided, and medical assistance was readily available. It was practical, affordable, and yet, as Robert walked through the hallways, he noticed something. Some residents sat silently, staring out the window. Stethoscope others were being helped into wheelchairs, their faces tired and empty. Television and TV played in the background, but no one seemed to be watching. It felt lifeless. That night, as he lay in bed, Robert whispered to himself, "This isn't where I belong." He wasn't ready to give up his freedom just yet. There had to be another way. And then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, Robert went for a walk to clear his mind. As he reached a small convenience store near his apartment, he overheard an argument. A young couple, the store owners, were speaking in hushed but urgent voices. "I know we can't afford it," the wife said, "but our daughter has been asking for this for months." The husband sighed. "We barely have enough to pay rent. We can't just spend money like that." Robert stood there, listening, and that's when an idea struck him. A solution so simple, so unexpected, that he could hardly believe he hadn't thought of it before. Maybe, just maybe, he could help them, and in doing so, they could help him too. Robert has tried everything. Living with family, hiring a caregiver, even considering a nursing home. Nothing feels right. But now, a chance encounter has sparked a new idea. As Robert stood outside the small convenience store, listening to the young couple argue, something clicked in his mind. They were struggling financially. He was struggling to live independently. Maybe, just maybe, they could help each other. That night, Robert lay awake, thinking. The idea seemed almost too simple. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Early the next morning, he made his way back to the store. The young couple, Mia and James, were just opening up. Their faces looked tired, burdened with the stress of running a small business while raising their child. Robert took a deep breath. "Can I have a word with you both?" Mia and James exchanged curious glances but nodded. As they sat down at a small table in the back of the store, Robert laid out his proposal. "What if I paid you $200,000 each month in exchange for some help?" he said. "Just small things, tidying up my place, doing laundry, and preparing simple meals." The couple blinked in surprise. "Mr. Robert, you don't have to pay us," Mia said hesitantly. "You've always been so kind to us." Robert smiled. "I want to. This way, it's not charity, it's a fair deal." James looked at Mia, then back at Robert. "This actually makes a lot of sense," he admitted. "It wouldn't take much time, and the extra money would really help us." For the first time in months, Robert felt a flicker of hope. Could this really work? The next day, the arrangement started. Mia and James would stop by Robert's apartment twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening. Hot beverage morning visit. Mia would tidy up, prepare breakfast, and make sure everything was in order before heading back to the store. Fork and knife with plate, evening visit. James would bring groceries, prepare dinner, and sit with Robert for a while before heading home. It was simple, nothing extravagant, but it made all the difference. For the first time since Margaret passed, Robert felt like he had a sense of stability again. He was still living in his own home, in his own space, but he wasn't alone. And best of all, it was affordable. At first, Robert thought of Mia and James as helpers. But over time, something unexpected happened. They became family. They would sit and chat after dinner, sharing stories about their lives. James would ask Robert for advice about running a business. Mia would bring their daughter over sometimes, filling the apartment with laughter. It wasn't just about getting help. It was about connection. One evening, as they sat together drinking tea, Robert looked around his cozy little apartment. He didn't feel like a burden. He didn't feel like an outsider. He felt at home. One day, Robert received a call from his son, David. "Dad, how's everything going? Did you find a new caregiver?" Robert chuckled. "Not exactly." He explained the arrangement with Mia and James, how it was working out better than he ever expected. David was silent for a moment. "Dad, this actually sounds perfect for you," he finally said. "I'm really happy you found something that works." Robert smiled. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. He had found a way to stay independent without being alone, and he had done it without rushing into a nursing home. Do you think more seniors should try alternative living arrangements instead of nursing homes? Type 3 in the comments below if you agree. Robert has found a new way to live independently, but his journey isn't over yet. In part 4, we'll see how his life changes as the years pass and the unexpected way he decides to repay the kindness of Mia and James. As time went on, Robert's arrangement with Mia and James continued to flourish. His days were filled with routine and companionship, Simple, yet deeply fulfilling. He no longer worried about how he would get groceries or prepare meals. He didn't feel like a burden to his children. And best of all, he still lived in his own home, in control of his own life. But something unexpected happened. The bond between Robert and the young couple grew stronger. They weren't just helping him out anymore. They genuinely cared for him. On weekends, Mia would bring their daughter to visit, filling the house with warmth and laughter. James would sit with Robert, sharing stories about work, life, and the challenges of fatherhood. Robert had gone from feeling lost and alone to feeling like he belonged again. And deep down, he knew he wanted to do something special for them. One evening, after dinner, Robert sat across from Mia and James. "I have something I need to tell you both," he said. They looked at him with concern. Robert took a deep breath. "You've both done so much for me these past few years, more than I could ever repay. But I want to try." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a legal document. "I've arranged for something special," he continued. "When my time comes, this house will belong to you." Mia gasped. James looked stunned. "Mr. Robert, you don't have to." "I want to," Robert interrupted gently. "This house has given me a life of dignity, and I want it to give you and your daughter a future." Tears welled up in Mia's eyes. James reached across the table and gripped Robert's hands tightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice shaking. "Thank you so much." Robert had always feared aging, not because of the physical struggles, but because he had seen too many people lose control of their own lives. He didn't want to spend his final years in a facility where he felt like just another resident. He didn't want to feel like a burden to his children. What he found was a different way, a way to live independently, with dignity, companionship, and choice. And in the process, he had helped another family along the way. As he sat back in his chair that evening, listening to Mia's daughter giggle in the next room, Robert smiled to himself. Aging didn't have to mean giving up everything. Sometimes the best solution isn't the obvious one. It's the one you create for yourself. If you believe that aging with dignity is possible, type "for" in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about better ways to grow old. This story of Robert isn't just about him. It's about every senior who worries about losing independence. It's about every family looking for a better way to support their elders. It's about rethinking aging, not as an end, but as a new beginning. So tell me, what would you do in Robert's situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep these conversations going. Thank you for being here. Until next time.